Here is a sentence that did not exist 2 months ago. Commercial ships sailing through the Gulf of Oman now hire floating armories, dedicated vessels loaded with weapons to travel with them as they approach the Strait of Hormuz, so that the private security teams aboard have something to shoot back with when the IRGC comes alongside. That is the concept behind the Huichuan, a Honduras-flagged vessel operated by Hong Kong's Sinoguards, a Chinese maritime security company that was sitting at anchor 38 nautical miles northeast of Fujairah on the morning of May 14, 2026, loaded with weapons and waiting. It was seized by unauthorized personnel, almost certainly IRGC commandos, and redirected into Iranian waters. Iran seized the weapon ship. In the same 24-hour window, an Indian cargo vessel was struck by a missile off the coast of Oman and sank. And in Washington, officials were quietly telling their counterparts in Abu Dhabi to consider physically taking Iran's Lavan island. The Hormuz War is no longer a bilateral conflict. It has become a regional contagion, and this week it spread to 3 new countries simultaneously. The floating armory, the concept that explains the war. To understand why a floating armory exists, you need to understand what has happened to maritime security in the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman since February 28th. Before the war, commercial ships transiting the region typically carried private armed security teams of 4 to 8 personnel, equipped with small arms, rifles, shotguns, sometimes a light machine gun, sufficient to deter the kind of opportunistic piracy that plagued these waters in the early 2010s. That threat model assumed that any aggressor would be a small criminal enterprise with light weapons, no state backing, and limited tactical sophistication. The IRGC Navy is none of those things. When Iran began using PACAP-3 fast attack craft armed with 107mm rockets and 23mm autocannons, and when it began deploying guided missiles and armed drones against commercial vessels, the small arms carried by private security teams became tactically irrelevant. A rifleman on the bridge of a container ship cannot stop a sea-skimming anti-ship missile. He cannot stop a swarm of fast boats armed with rockets. The security industry adapted with the only tool available, escalating the weapons aboard the ships themselves. Floating armories emerged as logistics platforms, vessels that stationed themselves in international waters at the approach to a high-threat area, allowing security teams to pick up heavier weapons for the transit and return them on the way out, avoiding the regulatory complications of carrying military-grade weapons into port. The Huichuan was that concept, deployed at the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, operated by a Chinese firm, crewed by a mixed nationality team, and now sitting in Iranian custody. Iran's decision to seize it tells you something important. The floating armory is not a warship. It poses no offensive threat to Iran. Iran cannot credibly claim it was targeting Iranian shipping or conducting hostile military operations. Seizing it was a deliberate choice to dismantle the defensive infrastructure that commercial shipping had built to survive the war, to strip the convoy routes of their ability to resist IRGC interdiction at the tactical level. And it was timed perfectly. It happened hours after Trump and Xi issued a joint statement in Beijing saying the strait must remain open. Iran read that statement, understood it as a diplomatic achievement that would produce no immediate military consequence, and responded by seizing a weapons platform off the coast of the UAE. That is not defiance. That is a calibrated message. Words do not change facts on the water. The Haji Ali was an Indian-flagged cargo vessel carrying livestock from Somalia to the UAE. It had nothing to do with U.S. sanctions, Iranian oil, or the Hormuz standoff in any direct sense. It was a merchant ship on a commercial route operated by Indian nationals carrying animals to a market. On May 13th, it was struck by a projectile. Vanguard, the British maritime risk firm, assessed it as a missile or drone, which caused a fire aboard. The ship lost structural stability and sank. All 14 crew members were rescued by the Omani Coast Guard. India's Ministry of External Affairs condemned the attack as unacceptable without identifying a perpetrator because no one has officially done so. But the trajectory of the vessel, its location off Oman, and the nature of the weapon used are consistent with every other Iranian attack on commercial shipping in the same area over the past 79 days. The Haji Ali matters for a reason that goes beyond the immediate tragedy of a sunk vessel and a frightened crew. India has been attempting to navigate this war from the outside. India is one of the world's largest importers of Iranian oil. It was purchasing significant volumes through the shadow fleet before the war began. India has substantial diplomatic and economic relationships with Iran. It hosted Iran's foreign minister, IRGC, at the BRICS foreign ministers meeting in New Delhi on May 14th, the same day the Hui-Chuan was seized. India has been carefully balancing its relationships with both Washington and Tehran, trying to preserve its oil access and its strategic autonomy. And now one of its ships has been sunk in the same body of water. India's neutrality just became more expensive to maintain. Every additional Indian vessel that gets struck raises the domestic political cost of remaining outside the conflict. Iran is not just attacking shipping, it is forcing bystanders to choose sides by making the cost of staying neutral operationally indistinguishable from the cost of being a combatant. The Haji Ali was carrying livestock to a market. The Hui-Chuan was storing weapons for security firms. Neither was a warship. Neither was a legitimate military target under any interpretation of the laws of armed conflict. Iran attacked and sank one and seized the other in the same 24-hour window. The war is no longer selecting its targets by nationality or military status. It is selecting them by geography. If you are in the Gulf of Oman, you are in the war. On the same day as the seizures, May 14th, hours after Trump and Xi released their joint statement, Iran's senior vice president Mohammad Reza Aref went on state television and said something that every maritime lawyer, every foreign ministry, and every insurance underwriter in the world immediately noted. He said, "The Strait of Hormuz has always been our property. We will not give it up at any price." Not a negotiating position, not a policy statement, a declaration of permanent sovereign ownership over a waterway that international law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, designates as subject to the right of transit passage for all states, regardless of their relationship with the bordering countries. UNCLOS Article 38 guarantees the right of transit passage through international straits. Iran is a signatory to UNCLOS. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and qualifies as an international strait under that framework. No country has ever successfully claimed sovereign ownership over an international strait in the modern era. What Aref said is not legally meaningful under international law, but international law is enforced by power, not by courts. And the power equation in the Strait of Hormuz right now is contested in a way it has never been before. Iran is not making a legal argument, it is making a facts-on-the-ground argument. We control what transits this strait. We have controlled it for 79 days. We are building institutions to control it permanently, and we are saying on state television that this is our property. The legal framework can catch up later. This is the Iranian approach. Establish the reality, then negotiate the recognition. The same approach it used with its nuclear program for 20 years. And then, on Saturday, the Telegraph published the most explosive piece of reporting of the entire war. Officials in the Trump administration are privately encouraging the United Arab Emirates to take a direct combat role in the war against Iran, including the seizure of Tehran's Lavan Island, a strategic oil hub in the Persian Gulf. Let's be precise about what that means and why it would change the entire geometry of the conflict. Lavan Island sits approximately 175 kilometers west of the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. It is the home of Iran's Lavan oil terminal, one of the primary export hubs for Iranian crude, and an IRGC military airstrip used for maritime surveillance and patrol operations across the central Persian Gulf. It is not just an oil platform, it is the command and control and logistics hub for the IRGC's ability to monitor, track, and interdict shipping in the waters between the strait and the UAE coast. If you remove Lavan Island from Iranian control, you blind the IRGC in a significant portion of its operational area, cut off a major oil export pathway, and create a permanent military foothold in Iranian-claimed waters for the UAE, and, implicitly, for the US forces that would almost certainly support such an operation. Why the UAE? Several reasons, all of them deeply strategic. The UAE has the most capable military in the Arab world, the most sophisticated air force, and the deepest economic interest in seeing the Hormuz disruption end. Fujairah, which has been repeatedly attacked, is the UAE's primary oil terminal outside the Gulf. The UAE also has the benefit of not being the United States. A UAE seizure of Lavan Island carries a different diplomatic profile than a US seizure. It positions the operation as a regional response to Iranian aggression, rather than American imperialism, a framing that matters enormously in the global South, where the Iran war is already viewed with significant sympathy for Tehran by populations who see the US as the aggressor. And it gives Trump a military escalation option that does not require him to be the one pulling the trigger publicly. Iran, for its part, has known this was coming. Iranian Foreign Minister IRGC, speaking at the BRICS meeting in New Delhi on May 14, accused the UAE of direct involvement in military operations against Iran, saying with careful diplomatic language, "I didn't name the UAE in my statement for the sake of unity," but making the accusation unmistakably clear. Netanyahu's secret visit to the UAE, confirmed by the Israeli Prime Minister before the UAE denied it, has further inflamed Iranian suspicion that Abu Dhabi is already operating as a partner in the US-Israeli war effort, rather than a neutral neighbor. The Lavan Island option, if executed, would validate every Iranian accusation about UAE involvement and give Tehran a justification to escalate against UAE territory, including, potentially, the Abu Dhabi oil infrastructure and the Fujairah terminal, far beyond anything it has done so far. Lavan Island is not just a target, it is a threshold. The moment an Arab state physically seizes Iranian sovereign territory, even territory Iran has used to conduct acts of war against international shipping, the conflict crosses from a maritime interdiction dispute into a territorial war. That is a different war, and it will not end at Lavan. Take a step back and look at what this week's events mean for the conflict's perimeter. 79 days ago, this was a US-Iran-Israel war, centered on airstrikes and a closed strait. Today, run the list of countries actively affected by kinetic events in the Gulf of Oman and Persian Gulf. The United States, naval forces engaged in blockade operations and ship escort. Iran, naval forces conducting seizures, missile launches, and drone attacks. Israel, whose intelligence and air assets remain active in the region. The UAE, Fujairah attacked repeatedly, now reportedly being asked to take a combat role. India, a cargo ship sunk, crew rescued, government formally condemning the attack. China, operating vessels under special IRGC transit protocols, a Chinese-backed security company's ship seized. Pakistan, mediating ceasefire talks that have so far produced only 3-day pauses. Oman, rescuing crews, hosting back-channel diplomatic communications. Saudi Arabia, watching its eastern oil infrastructure with increasing alarm, and now potentially the UAE as a formal belligerent. That is not a bilateral conflict. That is a regional war with global economic consequences. And the definition of who is in it is expanding, not contracting. Here is the picture on day 79. Iran seized the weapon ship that was keeping commercial vessels alive in the strait. Iran sank an Indian cargo ship with no military connection to the conflict. Iran's VP declared the Strait of Hormuz Iranian property forever. And Washington is whispering to Abu Dhabi, take the island. The Trump-Xi summit said the strait must stay open. Iran answered with a seizure the same evening. The ceasefire is not a ceasefire. It is a managed escalation with diplomatic branding. And the war that started on February 28th as a US-Iran standoff is now touching India, China, the UAE, and a livestock carrier from Somalia that had nothing to do with it. One question. If the UAE seizes Lavan Island with US backing, does that end the war faster by removing Iran's interdiction capability?
Comment, ends it. Or does it expand the war into a full regional conflict that cannot be contained? Comment, expands it. Stay sharp. The geography of this war is changing, and the next country to be pulled in may not see it coming until its ship is already on fire.